We're good. Yeah, we're good. So are we all good? Does anybody else need to come back from the loo, or has everybody got something to eat and drink and we're all fully refreshed? I'm going to need you to talk to me because we're all going to fall asleep otherwise. Yeah, we're all okay? Yeah, awesome. That's what I like to see, thumbs up. So we're going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to be talking to you from my slightly different position, working at People Factor Consultants, which is on Union Street. And they spend a lot of time developing specialist non-technical skills training packages. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about how you do that, because we just spent all morning giving some very interesting research and all our kind of academic jargon, so it might be a little bit more useful to tell you how we actually do it. So what we're going to cover is how do we train non-technical skills? What does that look like practically? You know, what do they go in a classroom? Do they go in a simulator? What exactly do they do? And then how can we measure non-technical skills? So if you come up with a fabulous training package, how do you know it was effective? How do you know if you didn't just dump, you know, $4,000 down the drain? And then I'm going to give you 2 examples from oil and gas, and at the end, if you've got any questions, we can fire away through them. But I'm good at my non-technical skills, and I'm aware that we all suffer from full tummies. So, up on the photos, I have 3 photos. One of them is Captain Tammy Jo Schultz. The next one is Sully, unless you haven't been watching films. And the last one is the flight crew from Flight 232. So, can anybody tell me who any of these people are? Okay, not the psychologist in the room. Shoot.
Well, the first one that was that just happened.
Yeah, tell me more.
There was a problem with, I think it was the engine, and then the window was sucked out, and the person had it sucked out, but she was really calm in that situation, and that's what kept closer.
Yeah, that's good, that's good.
Yeah.
So, Tammy Jo Schultz was in the news, just as you said, because their flight experienced a really bad situation where their engine essentially exploded. They don't know why it exploded, but it did. This resulted in a huge amount of shrapnel, and the shrapnel affected other aspects of the plane, and one of the things that it caused was a window to blow out, and this pulled a woman halfway out the window. Unfortunately, the woman subsequently died. But what people have focused on is how calm and collected she was, and not just with the rest of her flight crew, but with the passengers. And the Tannoy voice coming over, they described her as having nerves of steel, you know? Okay, what about Captain Chelsea Sullenberger? Yeah? Tell me more.
It was the first strike, wasn't it?
It was?
And so it got power, and the only way to land is that everybody else was telling it was in the middle of the
And do you remember how, for everyone who couldn't hear him,
it was calm.
it was very calm. So what happened was his flight experienced a bird strike. It's pretty much what it says in the tin. A bunch of birds went in the engine, sucked them up. Engines don't like birds being in there. And the engine failed. So, you know, he's trying to figure out what to do. Now, this is a real crisis situation. This isn't we'll try and find an airport. This isn't an option. So in 2 minutes, I think it's like 41 seconds, he makes a plan and he acts on it, and he communicates that to air traffic control. And his plan, or the best plan he had available, was to land in the Hudson River. And spectacularly, everyone was fine. All right, tell me about the one in 1989, so Flight 232, slightly older. Anybody know? Take a stab in the dark, otherwise I'm going to pick on you.
Landed a plane.
They landed a plane, right, so how did they land a plane? And he was, well, there was 4 of them. Well, technically there was about half a dozen of them. No, nobody willing to take a guess? Wait to Google. Thanks very much. Thanks. Well, at least we're awake, you know. So what happened was their plane also experienced an engine failure. I feel that perhaps they should spend more money on engine design, but okay. Yeah, they had an engine failure. And this is, what, 1989, and this was a serious situation. And our captain here, who's the furthest away, So Captain Hayes, he's really struggling to gain control. So they have the control columns and they're trying to work out what to do. And he's first and second officer, they're really starting to go, I don't know what to do. They try tying the two control, what do you call them, control, yeah, it's not quite like this, it doesn't matter. They try tying them together with a rope. You know, when you're trying to tie pieces of equipment together with a rope, you know the situation is not great. And as it happened, the flight attendant went in to check on them. She recognized the situation was now at a crisis point. She had a look at the passenger list and saw that there was another pilot on board, which was our Captain Fitch, or Dennis, who's the closest to us. And she asked him, would he come on and assist? In a nice, calm, collected way, not like, oh my God, everybody's all going down. Now, between the four of them, they were able to turn a situation which was pretty much guaranteed everyone's going to die. No lie. Everyone in any of their situations, we all die. And there was about over 200 people. And they managed to save about half, which was miraculous. Utterly miraculous they managed to save all these people. So, tell me, what is the link? Why have I put this up on the screen? Come on, you guys know the answer. Shoot.
Well, you specifically mentioned they were called about 3 times now.
Yep.
I assume the link is non-technical skills and their situational awareness and control.
Bingo bongo, yeah. So the link is their crew resource management. So if we start at the kind of the right side on my angle, in 1989 we know that aviation had been starting to introduce crew resource management training, but it hadn't really hit the news in that way, and it was the investigation reports picked up that the crew resource management was what saved the day, essentially. It's a bit of a paraphrasing of an investigation report, but it's essentially what they came out with. And this made crew resource management very high profile, and it's what even started to encourage other industries to take that on. Sully, if there's also a film, in case you're wanting something in the evening to watch, Sully famously has said that the thing that was able to give him the strength to land a plane was his crew resource management. It was his training. He said it on many a talk show, many a film, and many a book. And we have our most recent, pardon me, with the Schultz. So Schultz, before being a commercial airplane pilot, was a fighter jet pilot. And they have very rigorous training. So she has had the benefit of both her fighter pilot and her commercial. And I'm pretty confident that a lot of that stuff, when they're talking about her nerves of steel and being able to be calm and collected, that will come down a lot to do with the crew resource management. So now that we're all nice and awake and perky, how do we even start? How do we start to develop a non-technical skills training program? Because we've all spent all morning talking about what it is, and that's great, but how do we do that? So a good start is to identify what those key non-technical skills are. And a part of that, and a part of what academics love to do, is we love to come up with tables and categorizations, and it's a way of us understanding what's going on. But it's a neat way of trying to work out what skills are particularly important for that role. Because some roles, as we were discussing earlier before lunch, require certain skills more than others, and certain situations will pull on particular skills more than others. So before we start our non-technical skills training package, we got to know what they are. And to do that, it means that we need to know what that person's role is. And we need to know what their job is, and how do they do that. And we have a standard set of methods for doing that. It's essentially you go ask them. You know, yeah, I know you're giggling, but it's true. There's no point in us saying this is how you do something. You ask the expert, you ask the person who goes out and does this every single day. So you can do that through interviews, you can do that through focus groups, you can do that through a whole range of different methods. And this gives you a tailored set of categories and skills and elements associated with that. And you can then take that and you can then inform your non-technical skills syllabus. So what are you going to teach? What are you going to train, essentially? But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we've got to think of a couple of things. Are there any particular problems that we're trying to address? I mean, we spent most of the morning talking about explosions, planes flying at the sky, fires, etc. Now, a lot of these have got problems associated with them. So if you're going to develop a non-technical skills training program, it's worthwhile keeping in mind if there are particular problem areas that you want to address. And you keep that in mind when you're developing that syllabus. You're also got to keep in mind your course duration. So how long do we think that we could get farmers to sit in a room with us? An hour? 3 hours. Oh God, you're really killing me. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take a moment. No, seriously, it's realistic. We have to be realistic about how long you can get somebody to be in a room with you. And you have to be realistic in how you're going to do that. Now, 3 hours isn't great, okay? But yeah, it probably is very optimistic, let's be fair. But what they go for in terms of guidelines and how to run these are minimum of 2 days. It's a minimum of 2 days essentially set in a classroom. Now I'll talk, yeah, I know I see your face. They ain't going to do that. But it's something that we need to be realistic and practical about how long we can realistically get somebody to come in and to be with us. But there is a standard method of developing these non-technical skills training programs. So what does it look like? Well, for your entertainment, I put together a draft syllabus. So we're all going to be farmers. We're all going to do this for 2 days. So for our first day, we're going to give an introduction because you're not preaching to the converted here. You have to give a real explanation of why you're there. You have to give, why are we doing non-technical skills? And mostly that comes down to giving them a reason to care. And that care can be, it costs you money, it causes incidents, or it can make you better at your job. So you always got to start your course with some kind of reason for why they should be there. Otherwise, you're just talking to a blank wall for 2 days. And then what you're going to do is you're going to split that 2 days giving them insight into these various skills. Okay? So it's pretty much a similar process depending on the skills. So we'll start with situation awareness. So if you're thinking back, our situation awareness is what's going on. So that we give them things like definitions and we talk about what does that mean to them. Because situation awareness means different things to different people. What applications are there to agriculture? Because that's, if you don't bring this up, there is no point in continuing on. We talk about perhaps about components or component skills, what are important, what do they need to know? Are there other ones that they would like to add? What else would they like to know? And then a key part of that is how do you cope with it? So if you have problems to do with situation awareness, perhaps you're distracted, you're tired, how do you cope with that? And coming up with practical methods of dealing with it. We do exactly the same. So if, for example, we've got our 2 days, that's taken us up until about, 11:30, maybe noon. And then before lunch, we maybe cover a bit on decision making. So we talk about what does decision making mean to you? What decisions do you make in your daily life? What decisions do you make that are unusual? What kind of decisions do you make that are difficult to make? What makes them difficult? What are things that are easy to do? We talk about different kinds of decision making. So how do you guys make decisions? Do you go through all your steps of today I'm going to wear the flowery shirt because, this is my decision-making step. Well, I'm going to also look at all my other shirts. No, I don't do that. I go, that shirt goes with those trousers, and that's what I do. There's not an analytical kind of way of doing it. That's my fast decision. Just put these on. Rather than, how am I going to select the best method for putting my slides together? Well, that I may do in an analytical way, where I go, well, previously this has worked in that way, and then I'm going to take that rule and apply it to the situation. And that works just the same. It works just the same in all fields, this idea of slow and fast decision making. We talk about limitations on memory. So do you guys know how much information you can hold in your head at any given time? Oh, you shush. Come on, speak to me. Otherwise I'm going to pick on somebody. Not enough? Okay. So if I was to ask you to remember a new phone number, how many digits do you think you could remember? Yeah? And is it plus or minus 2? Yeah, plus or minus. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the psychology department input there. Yeah, so we're going to spend some time talking about what limits your ability to make decisions. And we have a limited capability. I always argue that humans are amazing. I'm amazed that we managed to get up and do all this amazing stuff. We're thinking about going to Mars. Who knew? But there are limitations in what we can do, and we have to be aware of those limitations so that we can then take steps to kind of mitigate them. Now, if you're aware that you can only cope with so much information, you then change your task management. You utilize methods to cope with that. So we talk a bit about that. And then on the end of the afternoon of our first day, we start talking about communication. And communication is really vital because it feeds into absolutely everything else. If you can't get on board with communication, you're really going to stick with your other non-technical skills. I think one of the ones that would be particularly useful in this context would be thinking about, well, how do you communicate if you're working by yourself? Who are you communicating to? How are you going to communicate? So if I'm talking about a rural crofter, and there's two of you, and you aren't going to see each other for another 14 hours, and there's no phone signal, how are you going to communicate? So there's lots of kind of issues that maybe other industries maybe don't have. I mean, let's be honest, did anybody get phone signal in here? No. And this is the centre of Aberdeen, in a very, well-known institute. So if we can't get phone signal here, how are we going to manage in Highlands? How are you going to manage outside Inverness? So there are things that we have to take into consideration. Particularly things like handovers, debriefs, what barriers are there to effective communication. If you're handing over to somebody halfway through lambing, you aren't going to remember everything. You've been up for 22 hours and you think this is fine. So there's things that you're going to have to be aware of that at that point you're going to have limited focus on. So that's our first day. How does everybody feel about doing their first day of non-technical skills? Yeah, whoop, whoop, yeah, I like the enthusiasm. But you see, it's quite heavy going if you want to do it in 2 days. Not 3 hours, but 2 days. So our second day, we talk about teamwork. We're talking about basic definitions. We talk about difficulties particularly related to teamwork in agriculture. So we have like two different situations. If you have a large company which has got, what, 100 employees, that is a different situation in terms of teamwork as a small crofter or sole trader where there's two of you. So there are differences, perhaps like your fixed wing, and there are differences that you have to take into consideration of who is in your team. How are you going to communicate? What does this do? Understanding different roles is an interesting one. So in healthcare, sometimes what they do is they have a surgical team. For those of you who don't know, surgical teams don't always get on. And there can be a lot of conflict between surgical roles, particularly perhaps between the anaesthetist and the surgeon. So what they do in non-technical skills training is they try and change their perspective, where they will do simulations and exercises where you go and take on somebody else's role. So for an hour, the consultant suddenly has to be the junior doctor, and the anaesthetist is suddenly the consultant, etc. You get the idea. Now, the purpose of this is not only to build kind of a sense of respect that actually your job is harder than I thought it was, but an understanding of each other's roles so you can better support each other. So we got a bit of teamwork. Before I keep going, conflict resolution. Do we think that conflict resolution is an important one in farming and agriculture? Or does everybody get on super happy breezy? Speak to me. Conflicts, we're going to call them conflicts. Okay, yeah, I think that conflict and being able to cope with conflict are a really important part, particularly in agriculture. I mean, if you're taking into consideration you're working very long hours, those relationships that you have with each other are often very close, and close relationships, as we all know, can be very tricky. They can come with their own strengths and their own weaknesses. So you've got these funny relationships, you're working alongside each other, you've got costs, you've got pressures, you've got time, you've probably got really bad weather because we're in Scotland. So you've got all of this going on, and so it's very important to have a good level of conflict resolution, or the ability to cope with it. Then we're thinking about leadership. Before lunch, we were talking about what skill do we think is the most important. Did anybody come up with leadership? Yep. Could you tell me why?
It's crucial.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put, you can't take out the future of one opening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So leadership, I think, in this context is really important for things like role modeling. So if you are seen to behave in a particular way, particularly around equipment or in relation to safety and what you take seriously, everyone else sees you doing that. And so I can't remember, I'm sorry, I can't remember who was saying it, but everybody, I think it was you, over lunch, and everybody's a leader. And there is a leader Everybody has a part of being a leader, even if it's a small thing in just wearing your PPE. Because in wearing your PPE, everybody else sees that you're wearing your PPE, and that sends a very strong signal, probably a lot stronger than everybody else realizes. All right, last one, understanding stress and fatigue. Are you going to tell me that people don't experience stress and fatigue in agriculture? No? Nobody's brave enough? Now, I ask this because I've actually done stuff like this before in oil and gas, and I've seen little faces screw up, and they go, no, no, we don't have stress and fatigue in oil and gas. And I have to cipher the laughs. Because everybody experiences stress and fatigue in some form or another in the workplace. It's the nature of work. Work is tiring, work is stressful. Sometimes it's very rewarding, but it is something that we come across. So a key component in the non-technical skills syllabus is understanding what that is, understanding how that works as part of your sleep patterns, your circadian rhythm, that kind of physiological thing that you can't control. And then what makes you stressed? Often I'll ask, what makes you stressed? Is it your work life balance? Is it your manager? Is it the complexity? Is it workload, etc.? Because everybody has different things that they find stressful. So it's not necessarily appropriate to say, right, well, these are the things that should make you feel stressed. Because it's not something that everybody finds. From my experience, this is often the most well-received part of the non-technical skills syllabus, and it's why it's at the end, because you can rattle through the other 5 and make sure that you have plenty of time to talk about it. And some people are very cagey, don't talk about it, and others it's very helpful for them. And I've seen drilling teams working together, and there'll be perhaps a younger guy who's been pushed up to a more superior level than perhaps he's used to, and he can spend some time talking to somebody who's been doing this for 20 years, and they'll go, okay, well, here's a couple of tips for you. Don't get stressed about this. Instead, delegate, or communicate, or methods of dealing with it. So, how do we feel at the end of our second day of non-technical skills? Yeah, I'm sorry, it's still not 3 hours, I know. But it's a rough example from what you can see, because I realize that we spend a lot of time talking about kind of conceptual things. So it's there to give you an idea of what it might look like. So, going back to our course duration, and this was something that we were talking about before lunch. A way of getting around this kind of difficulty of how are we going to get them in there for 2 days and not 3 hours is integrating it into technical training. So, for example, a way of integrating that in well control is that they will do well control training and they'll integrate non-technical skills into that. And then rather than having a 3-day non-technical skills course, which no oil company would sign up to, we have a 4-day training course. Now, 3 days or 2.5 days are essentially technical stuff. They totally buy into it, they want to be there. And then we slip in a kind of cheeky way, extra little bits. And you add a little bit to begin with, and you add another bit, and then by the end of it, they totally buy into it. And if you can then combine that with the use of simulation facilities, so you can then get them to go and practice the skills. And those skills it's not ever going to be just non-technical skills that you're practicing. You can then practice your technical and non-technical skills. So it really highlights the value of non-technical skills in supporting that technical competence. So unfortunately, a lot of the delivery methods do include spending quite a bit of time in a classroom. But to make this a little bit more exciting and a little bit more relevant, the way that it's often done is using case studies. And these case studies can be based on company data, they can be based on high-profile incidents, and we can even ask participants to bring their own one or their own experience to the table, and you dissect it. And you try to understand how did that situation develop, why did they make these decisions? Oh, hello. Okay. Why did they make these decisions? Why did they do that? Would you have done that in the very first instance? Because sometimes I've had teams where they go, but I wouldn't do that. I would never do that. It's ridiculous. But you ask them to talk through these scenarios, and you ask them to think, well, why might have somebody came to this decision? Why might they have done that? And you can start to have a bit more insight and understanding. So refresher, I think I may be getting a little bit of my head of myself, but it is something to keep in mind. You know, learning does a lovely drop-down curve after, 6 months, 8 months. And so there is a need for it to be refreshed. Now, Civil Aviation Authority recommends between 1 and 3 years, depending on what you're doing. Drilling recommends between 2 and 3, and healthcare, well, that depends on which department you're in. But there is an argument for doing this every 2 to 3 years. I'm not suggesting you do a full 2-day course every 2 years, because nobody will ever sign up to that. But you can do a half day or a day length course, or you can start to move it into your technical training, just to kind of keep up that kind of performance standard, to make sure that people are on board. Okay, something that you were mentioning earlier about trainee competence. There is no point in sending somebody on a non-technical skills course if they are not technically competent. It will go over their head and you will have wasted your money. And this is a kind of tricky point, because it means that companies or whoever is putting somebody forward for a non-technical skills training course, or any training course, needs to be honest about their competency. So there's no point in sending assistant drillers on a drilling course, for example, though I see many of them go along. And in the same token, your instructors need to have technical knowledge, otherwise nobody buys into it. You know, there's no point in having a psychologist go and talk to a bunch of them, because they just don't buy that. Just not a lot, and that's about it. So there's a kind of compromise between who delivers the material and who facilitates, and often it's a between mishmash of people who have very expert technical knowledge and those who are very expert psychological or non-technical knowledge, and having them mashed together and being both in the room to support that. And then how do you know that your non-technical skills course was effective? You know, how do you know? Everyone thought it was great? Well, there's lots of methods and guidance on how to do that. So, got that. We've got a training course. We're thinking we're going to do it in a classroom. MDB in a simulator? Yeah? No? No, any simulator. Any simulator. Was it fun? And how long did it take you when you got into that simulator to believe in it? Yeah, but like less than 5 minutes? Yeah, the competitive things comes out, yeah. So simulators are a fabulous resource. These can be very low fidelity. So essentially bits of paper, and you run through scenarios, and you can draw little different doodads out. And it's a relatively cheap way of doing it. You just have to make sure that your scenarios are realistic. Or you can have some really fancy, swishy, high-fidelity simulators. The advantage of these is because people buy into them very quickly. My most common question was, well, how would it's a simulator? It's not real world. Well, you can come with me to a drilling simulator and you can watch 5 very grown-up men go into one of these, and after 5 minutes they become very competitive. And they will totally believe this. And so it gives a great example to see how people will behave. It's the closest link you have to seeing how people behave in the real world. So it is something to consider. I appreciate that we may be a little bit ahead of ourselves. So there are plenty of really cool agricultural simulators. This is one I pulled from John Deere website. And it's actually not that dissimilar to the ones we have in healthcare, in oil and gas, and many in aviation, where you have much of the equipment is the same, but your environment around you is just displayed on LCD screens. One thing that you do need, though, is scenarios. And how good your scenarios are really determines how good your simulations are. If they're made up, and they're made by somebody who did them in the back of a napkin before lunch, nobody will buy into them. So they need to have non-technical skills within them. But as we know, non-technical skills are very closely linked to our technical ability, so that's not a problem. They can be based on incidents or near misses or particular company data. I have seen entire scenarios being built around particular rigs. So over in Ardesir, they have lots of docked rigs, and so in preparation to get those rigs out, they will do, if they're lucky, very large full-scale simulations on how to start these rigs up. And they build it around the entire rig. It'll have a specialized schematic, it'll have specialized scenarios, it'll have all this. And so there's no reason that later on down the line, if we keep going with this, that isn't an option for agriculture, having specialized scenarios for particular types of tasks, for particular times of year, particularly if we're thinking about things like harvest or lambing. These are our high-stress situations, or our high-stress times. So we've got our simulation exercises. These are really great. These are very valuable for transferring our skills that we've learned sitting in the classroom being a bit bored into the simulator, and it really gives them a lot more relevance, because it's one thing talking about it. in slides, and it's a whole different thing having to do it and transfer that into kind of actual behaviors. From my experience, some guys love getting the feedback. They take this as a challenge to improve and improve and improve. Others are a little trickier. But eventually they do tend to get on board with it if you get that you're on the same team. You're not telling them off, you're not being critical, you're trying to help them. You're on the same team. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, because I think this may be a solution that we were considering, is that integrating your simulation exercises in combination with your technical and non-technical thing may be a way of getting started on this. And it really highlights that non-technical skills element. You know, something goes wrong in the simulator and you ask them why. Why did that go wrong? How did you miss the flashing light? And they go, I didn't look. And I go, well, why did you not look? I think I just didn't see. And I'm like, well, how is that technical competence? You're technically able to use the equipment in front of you, and they go, oh yeah, I guess it was situational awareness. So it's very valuable for that use. So we've got our 2-day simulations, we've got our course and our classroom time, we've done all this, we've integrated it into technical training, we've spent a lot of time, money, and effort on this. How do we know if it's effective? Well, you'll be pleased to know that there's a standard method for doing this. Otherwise, that's very depressing. So you can do that, you can assess non-technical skills in a formative way, and Oliver spoke about this earlier in terms of licenses to operate. So pilots need to pass this. This is part of their license. It is a mandatory regulated thing. This means that you have to have a validated assessment system, and you have to have qualified assessors. It is a fully set up system. I'm not sure that we're there yet. You know, I'm really shooting above where we're at. So a lot of other industries, instead, what they take as an informative assessment route. And it essentially just means that you're giving feedback. And the purpose of the feedback is just to direct improvement. And this is often really well received if it's done correctly. And that does mean that your instructors have to have at least some debriefing skills. But again, don't worry, there's a method for that. It's free and available online. It's called DASH. It comes from the Harvard Medical School. So the main method for assessing non-technical skills is using a behavioral marker system. These came out way back in terms of our crew resource management and our non-technical skills in aviation. So they're a way to observe non-technical skills in a simulation, and this can be part of just general observation to see how you're doing, and it can be part of an assessment. So for example, if we had a week-long training course, because somehow I've managed to get everyone to agree to be in the room with me, you could run this in a particular way where you have a short simulation, say on a Monday, and you observe them and you use this tool to observe them, and probably this is going to give you a baseline. You could then run consecutive small simulations throughout that week to see if you can start to see improvements in that. And at the end, you can then do a very large scale one if you feel like it, at the end, for example, on a Friday. And this can be your form of informal assessment. So behavioral markers, the key point in behavioral markers is that they have to be observable and they have to contribute to safe and effective performance. There's no point in trying to assess something if you can't see it. Because if we all imagine that right now we are instructors, we are on a simulation, and we're trying to look around each other and we're trying to guess what's going on in their head, that's very tricky. So it's all based around what's observable. That, of course, does make it trickier for things like situational awareness, decision-making, and stress and fatigue, because by the time that somebody's really experiencing stress and fatigue and it's visible, we're in trouble. You know, because you can't feel somebody's heart palpitations. Generally, you can't see if they're sweating, and generally, you don't know if they've got butterflies. You can't tell this. So they do have to be observable. So this is roughly what it looks like. But I'm guessing, can we all see it on the little screens okay? So this is a behavioral marker system, and it's the rating tool that they've used. This is actually came from Rona Flynn and colleagues, non-technical skills for surgeons. And as we can see, we've got a bit of blurb at the top, which is really just a bit of administrative stuff. So what hospital are we in, who's the trainer, who's the trainee, date, what are we operating on, what's our task, essentially. And so what we're going to do is when we go into our simulation, we're then going to have a look and we're going to use this as a checklist, essentially, or as a rating tool. And we have a set of things that we have to look at, and we have a marking system or a rating system that goes from 1 to 4. So we have 1, which is very poor, we're not looking for 1, and then it goes all the way up to 4. It also has not applicable, because some situations, these skills, or these in those particular scenarios, these skills won't be available. So it's to ensure that people aren't being marked down for something that they shouldn't be displaying. But this is essentially what they look like, these behavioral marker systems. Some are more complicated. Some have an additional column that goes out, which is on my side, which is on the right, depending where you're at. And this will have particular behaviors that they're looking for. And it's to ensure that those particular behaviors are picked up, rather than generic ones of gathering information. So this could be in checks, surgical checklist, twice, for example. Anybody have any questions of what these look like, or if there's anything else that I've missed? No? No? Okay, good. So how do we do this in oil and gas? All right. So this morning I talked about offshore drillers. All you really need to know is that they're the person who sits in a large chair, or perhaps stands, depending on what kind of rig you're on, and uses the equipment to drill into the seabed and soak out oil and gas. They call it hydrocarbons, but oil and gas is good enough for us. And this is our driller right in the middle there. Do you see him? Now, generally, and I do say his generally because it is generally men that are doing it, not entirely. His team is around him and he's pink. And that's the set of people that he works with. These are the set of people that he needs to gather information from and that send information back to him. He also has to work with the operator and a set of service companies. And he has to do all this while monitoring a set of screens, not dissimilar to the ones that we have in the front of the room, but much smaller. So he's watching a bunch of screens constantly for 10 to 12 hours a day, with maybe half an hour off for lunch, and maybe 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the afternoon. And that's a pretty hard job whilst trying to talk to all of these people on the phone. So our driller needs a very high level of non-technical skills. So he needs to be able to have a high level of situation awareness so as to know what's going on in the well, but not just in the well. He also needs to know what's going on in the rig, because what's going on in the rig will make a difference to the decisions he makes and where he goes and what he does. But he also needs to make decisions not just about the equipment, the changing rate in drilling, or the chemicals that they use, etc. But he needs to make decisions on when to start, when to stop, what might affect him, how might this play out. And then there's a huge amount of teamwork and leadership, and it all gets very messy because all of these people, at some point or another, have to then be included. And then you have all this kind of complex stuff to do with they're on a rig, which is essentially just a large tin can, for 3 months, 3 months, 3 weeks at a time. Anybody went on a large family holiday for more than a week? No? Yeah, we all know what I'm talking about. Except they aren't your family members, these are just a bunch of strangers you have to work with. So what we did is we developed a specialist non-technical skills training program. We did it in conjunction with RGU, because the little photograph up there, that is their specialist drilling simulator. And the program of the non-technical skills course was actually combined with their technical training. They had to have mandatory well control training. They have to have their well control ticket essentially every, I think it's year to 18 months, depending on your role. So they have to do it, they have to be there. But what we did is we added this extra bit in. So they got to try out their well control situations and their well control operations in that. And they really get into it, they really enjoy it. This is their love, okay? But at the same time, we start to introduce this non-technical skills. Just like I was talking about 5-10 minutes ago. We start to introduce a little bit on the Monday, and then we do a full session on a Tuesday afternoon, and then they start to get to practice it on Wednesday mornings. And then when they have their assessment, which they have to pass, which is part of their license to drill, essentially, they get this assessment part where they run a large simulation on a Friday, and it's like called bad day at the office, where essentially everything goes wrong. Everything that can go wrong. We have distractors, we start phoning them up, we make up helicopter sounds, everything that we can think of, we're going to do to them to see what happens. I've seen some amazing outcomes. And they get feedback on that. Now, they do a well control exam also on the Friday, and that's what determines whether they go offshore or not. So the human factors component, they can fail it, and they can still go offshore. But they're given, their company and their supervisors are advised that they have not done well in the simulation. Generally, this doesn't happen. But this is just an example to see how this works in a particular way. And yeah, it was really well received. They really enjoyed it. It was amazing. I got a bunch of guys who did not want to talk to me on Monday morning. And they were really into it. We gave them books away. A lot of them have joined projects subsequently. So there can be a real uptake in it and a real enthusiasm once you get them in the door and get them to buy in it. The other example that I have is slightly different. So is anybody in offshore? No? My days is, yeah? I was just asking if anybody in offshore.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So I've got one that's pretty good. I was surprised. Did you enjoy it? Either of you?
I was just saying to my group, the closest I got to offshore, even having my podium run out, was standing on the dock and not being allowed to take the half-a-metre step onto the subsea that was docked because my podium ran out like a week before.
Yeah.
So
No paperwork, no go.
No, I could deal with the guys from this distance, but I couldn't.
Yeah, they're funny like that. Did you enjoy it?
No, I went out to students.
Mm-hmm.
And every 3 months I correct and just something I want to listen to.
In all fairness, if you're going out to audit, yeah, they wouldn't be welcome. They wouldn't be thinking, oh, she's coming in, great. But what I'm getting at, so where did all the power come from? So if you went offshore, you got lights, you got heat, well, hopefully.
No, what's it called? I was taken out there, I just protected.
So what they have is giant generators. You have generators in agriculture, right? How big is your generator? Well, give us a guess.
Somewhere by there.
Yeah, somewhere by there. So actually probably not different from our offshore generators. They're huge, giant generators. They're huge pieces of electrical equipment, and they run everything, okay? And when the generators go down, this is when we got 2 hours and the time is running out. Generators go down, you've got no power, you've got no electricity, you've got 2 hours until you have to start to fly people off, essentially. So this is where responsible electrical persons, just a bit of a mouthful, this is where they come in. It is their job to maintain that electrical system. And if for some reason the generators go out or we have a blackout, it is their job to get everything back up and running. And this is very stressful. I thought it was quite a simple job. No, I was wrong. Hands up, I was wrong. This is a very complicated job. This isn't just looking after 6 generators. This is looking after a huge electrical system on an offshore rig. And things are not straightforward like they are in a house. Okay, so it's very complicated. And what they found is that these particular individuals needed really high non-technical skills. They needed to be able to cope with stress. They needed to be able to make decisions under pressure. They needed to work within really effective teams, and they needed to have some leadership and mentoring. But the industry was a bit like, okay, whatever. So what they started to do at PSC is they developed a specialist course. It again is very similar to the drilling one, where it is technical training mixed into non-technical training, and they have an assessment at the end. It's very straightforward. Some people really enjoy it, some people don't. But what we found is the more that they do it, the more that they enjoy it throughout the week. And what's interesting is this is now mandated. Companies want to have REPs, they have to have their human factors or their non-technical skills component signed off. You don't pass, you don't go. And so this is they're a bit further down the line on others. So that's roughly how it works. So before we get all too miserable, there is a standard method for developing non-technical skills training. It does have to be based on empirical evidence, and it does have to be role-specific. Having a combination of classroom and simulator time is the most valuable. It's what generally people buy into whilst still learning, essentially. There are methods for assessment, such as the behavioural marker systems, and that these can then inform other safety management processes. Now, my little ranty bit, and my very last thing, is that this didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't a bunch of researchers sitting in a lab going, this is a great idea. This was hard work, and it originated through research. And it was research between universities and academics and actual guys out the front line. Okay, so people like yourselves, and came through via collaboration. If we don't have collaboration between the two, we really come up against a wall and get rather stuck. So this is the final point I'd like to leave you with. Thank you very much.
Very quickly, if there's anyone who wants to ask a very quick question, or we'll move on to the next.
Shoot.
To do the simulations, if you had a simulator at an agricultural show,
Yep.
and you ran it without the training, and you just ran the simulator so people could try the scenarios, what happens to those? What potentially happens then to the guys that don't learn the lesson from the simulators? That just it reinforces
So you're
stupidity almost.
So you're
of the
concerned that somebody goes to an agricultural show, goes into a simulation, and instead of learning that don't do this, they somehow come out learning the other one.
No, it just reinforces their
Bad
mindset.
behavior. So this is where the value of a highly trained instructor comes in, where you have somebody who's there to facilitate it, to ensure that that message comes across. But I won't lie, there are always going to be a percentage of people who don't buy into this. It's the same in every industry. But that's the real value of having a facilitator there in hand. Thank you. If there's anything else you want to ask me at the end. Thank you.
Right, we'll crack on. My name's Ian Sutherland from the Health and Safety Executive. I'm an inspector currently within a part of the organisation that develops strategy and policy within agriculture, amongst other things. That's the part that Rick Brunt, who was originally booked to give this talk, heads. And I'm part of one of the units who deals with agriculture, personally, specifically, forestry. Agriculture, in terms of farming, is something I've been involved in over quite a few years from inspection point of view. So inspecting the industry, seeing the problems it has, and witnessing the attitudes the industry has to risk and managing the risks. And also witnessing firsthand the effects of when things go wrong. So, I need this. I'm all for, if someone has a question, ask me while it's fresh in your mind. It'll also keep you awake as well. If you're feeling sleepy, ask a question. Okay. Right.
Ian, can I ask a question before you start?
Yes.
Not because I'm feeling sleepy, but why didn't you Scotland not on that? Have we not signed up to it?
On what?
Right, you've got Welsh Union and you've got English Union. In the last slide.
Oh, I don't know. I took this, I changed my name on it, so I'm not sure. I'm sure you're signed up in all other things, other than not being there. So, yeah, you should be. But it will be mentioned later anyway. In the final one, you'll be there. So there's 5. So I don't know why. Okay, to that. Just in terms of why I'm here, right? The first bit is to go over the problem. When I say ask questions, I might take that back. Right, we'll go over the problem, what the specific problems are. We've touched on statistics, we'll look at them in a bit more detail. Insight into farming attitudes to risk. There's insight research that's just been done and just been published. It's made available, a review of it this week, which I didn't realise until today, but it is available online. So there's insight into attitudes, behaviours and experience of people working on farms, which we will use and intend to use and intend to make available for the industry as well. We'll have a look at what goes wrong. Again, a lot of things you'll be familiar with, but it's reinforcing what goes wrong, why it's going wrong. And a wee chat about where NTS, non-technical skill, fits in my opinion. Fatal injury rates over time. This is the chart that we have there. What we see here, if this is for agriculture, and if we had one overlaid on that for construction for all industries, what we would see for construction all industries is the line getting slowly less and less as it goes over to the right. So what we have with agriculture is it's stubbornly, this is rates. So this is fatal injury rates. So how many fatal injuries we'll have per 100,000 members of the workers within agriculture. And at the moment we're setting at 7.6, and it's kind of just floated along around about that. There's no particular trend, other, it should be said, than the last 5 years, where there does seem a discernible trend in it getting less, which is a positive sign, but it has to really continue to convince us there is difference being made. So there are signs of improvement in the last 5 years. But other than that, it's stubbornly stayed round about there, and there is no improvement which can be seen elsewhere. I said I would get this wrong once. Okay. In terms of deaths, this is the statistics from last year. Well, the last recording, the 16-17 period. We record from the financial year, so April to March. 30 people killed, which is slightly less than the annual average over the last 5 years of 32, but round about the norm. And what's clear is it's transport again. Killed when struck by a farm vehicle. That's the biggest threat to life on a farm. Killed when trapped by something collapsing, be it bales or machinery. Killed when struck by objects. It can be a tree or a vehicle. So this sets out the things that are doing the damage. And there's nothing new about this. There's nothing surprising about this. It's the same old, same old. It's happening again and again. Just different farms, different people. There's nothing greatly different in there. Also, looking at ill health, musculoskeletal disorders, by far and away above other illnesses that are likely to happen. And different from perceptions of risk amongst farmers as well. So 15,000 workers suffering from work-related illnesses each year. 27 fatal injuries in the last recording year, and 13,000 non-fatal injuries to workers each year. Again, we've got to be careful because there's a lot of under-reporting. Hard to do with fatals, but easier and something to be taken into account. And how it's compared over time, compared to other industries, the fatal injury rate compared to all industries is 18 times higher in agriculture. And it's 6 times higher than construction. Within the area that I have particular interest in, forestry, it's even higher than agriculture in general. So there is a distinct difference between industry on the whole and what is perceived as one of the high-risk industries, which is construction and agriculture. There is a problem. And it's not as if the solutions to these problems are mysterious and unknown, and they've just come into being now. They've been around for a long time. Accidents on ATVs. The need to wear a helmet is a requirement, a legal requirement. The need to maintain a bike is a legal requirement. The need to be trained to ride a bike is a legal requirement. Still, we get the accidents where people aren't trained, no helmets are worn, and the bike's in a poor condition. Children on farms. Unfortunately, last year in Scotland, we had one child who was tragically killed on the family farm. And that was after a period of a few years where we had none. It still happens. Yet, again, there's regulations being in place relating to children on farms, particularly those children under the age of 13, and as well as the younger people who are getting introduced to work on farms. So that's been around for a while. Contact with overhead power lines. Again, the requirements to manage this risk has been around for a couple of decades and longer, really. So again, it's been there. The other thing with the overhead power lines, these don't just appear overnight. They're on farms. People know where they are. Yet still things are done around them, which don't need to be. Manual handling of livestock. Again, the requirements to have facilities in place to help manage livestock, which again is one of the biggest risks a farmer faces. And it was just yesterday we've had another fatal up in the Outer Hebrides, in one of the youths, again involving cattle in a shed. But the requirements to have facilities to handle them have been around for a long time. And there's a lot of information and a lot of research and a lot of good advice and good techniques available. Our website being one of them. So, going on to the insight, we know there's all these risks, but HSE wanted to really evaluate how best to approach them. It's done many things over the years, looking at how people think, how things are developed, how to influence people. But we decided again, because of this flatlining, this lack of an increase in improvements, we're looking again, and we commissioned some insight research. This isn't something I've been directly involved in, but it's something that I am now familiar with the outcomes of. And its aim was to better understand what drives people, their thinking, their behaviour, what their experiences and attitudes to risks are, and the way they do things. And that is to help us to target better the information we want to do, the activities we do within the industry. Focusing, as I say, on farmers' attitudes and perceptions around the management of risks. And not just doing it in isolation, working with the industry, working with the stakeholders, and with farmers themselves. And then from that, the outcomes look to develop, again, our interventions, and also assist the industry as a whole and the other stakeholders to look at how they can improve things. And one of the other aims as well is to identify segments in the industry. We can send the same message out to all parts of the industry, and we're unlikely to have the success that we're looking. Each person is an individual, that's right. Each person is different. Each people will be influenced by different messages. But if we can identify segments with which one certain message will work, or with which we really need to focus our work and limited resources on, and the same with the industry, then there's a potential for more success from these campaigns or interventions. So we looked for these attitudinal differences. Are the defining characteristics of each segment. 4 segments were created, really, which, whether you fell in them or not, was dependent on the characteristic and how you perceived the risks that you faced and the attitudes to them, and your attitudes and to taking risks or avoiding risks, and also how you respond to information that you're given. And it's very hard to stick someone in a category. It's very difficult. People don't want to be categorized, don't want to be in a box, put in a box. And just because you might have the attitudes of what here we have first as a planner, doesn't mean you're not likely to have aspects of you that fall into other areas as well. But it will help in terms of, as I say, how we deliver our messages. Thankfully, the biggest group, this was done on the basis of interviews with about 1,600 farmers, and a series of questions delving into their attitudes, behaviours and experience in terms of risks. So of the 1,600, roughly, slightly more, 45% of them are in the segment of planners. These are the people who are most wary about the risks. They have the greatest understanding of the risks, but they feel the safest because they plan. They understand that the actions they take will influence the levels of risk that they face. They have the fewest accidents, and they're also one of the happiest, because also well-being, mental well-being was asked. They're the ones most content. So they really know what they need to do, and they do it. And they're less likely to take risks, such as working when tired or ill. 14% pragmatists. They also understand the risks, but they're less worried about the consequences. They know what they've got to do, and they demonstrate that they do plan for risks, and their behaviours are relatively safe. Yet they respond differently to messages because they're least worried about the consequences. But they do it. They understand. We then get the risk takers, which surprisingly are the over 65s generally. They're most likely to the element of enjoying risk. They're told it's dangerous. This is being on a roof, walking the pylons. It's dangerous, but the risk kind of does something. There's a wee bit of excitement about it, and their behaviours reflect this. And they're not interested in being told the industry is dangerous. You need to do something different. They do worry about the consequences, though. So that's our way in terms of giving a message. They might not respond to messages about doing it this way or make it safer, but they might respond to messages about risks having consequences. And then there's this unclear group, 23%, nearly a quarter. And these are almost fatalists. They know farming is high risk, but they don't know what to do about it. It's almost like, yeah, it's high risk, but, well, I've got to work in it. I've got to deal with it. I've got to deal with it. They're the least safe, and they have the most accidents. They are seen to have feel they have least control over managing those risks, and therefore they don't respond to general messages about be safe, do this and you'll be safe. They say, it's dangerous, it'll happen anyway. So these are the unclear. They do respond to support though. So we've got the 4 categories. And from this information, we're looking at how to use it, and it's developing our intervention strategies with them. In terms of messages, what has been suggested from this is with the planners, they listen to everything. A lot of it reinforces what they know, and they'll take what they need from this information. So if it's general, like health and safety is sensible, be healthy and be safe, do this, then they'll take away that. If it's emotive, like if you do this, it might mean your children will die. If you do this, you might lose your farm. Again, they'll take it on board. Specific, if you're getting off a track to put handbrake on, they'll respond to that. They'll probably know it anyway. So it supports what they already know. And they'll use these as tools to improve things where they see they need to improve. The pragmatists, again, they're ambivalent to messages. Generally, they'll take them on board possibly, but the emotive message. If it's emotive, it's about the consequence of the accidents, they'll take it on board. The risk takers, again, a bit more receptive to the specific message about if you're doing roof work, do it this way. Don't walk on the perms. The emotive, those risks have consequences. Think about those consequences. With the unclear, where they think the management of risk is daunting, they know it's important, but it's too much for them, they don't respond well to the general, you have to do health and safety. Health and safety is important. They know it's important, it's just that they don't feel they can manage it. Or the emotive, because they know it's going to happen. Yeah, I know if I do that, I'm going to, but hey, it's the industry I work in. But the supportive message, and this is probably the example, we run safety awareness days, SHADs, and there's scenarios within them looking at specific risks and how to deal with them. So it's almost an arm around the shoulder saying, we know it's difficult, but we have a way of doing this, and we'll show you this way. So that kind of message is something that they can do. But they're the unclear and the risk takers, these are where most accidents happen. So that's maybe where we need to focus the type of message we get. So that general message of, health and safety is important, maybe it's not as useful as we think. It's those emotive, those specific and supportive messages that potentially can have the biggest outcome. So there's a lot to learn from this. It is available, and it is quite interesting research. And what we're going to do with it is going to develop as time goes on a wee bit. So the other thing with attitudinal segments, they make sense, but it's not like, this attitude applies to dairy farmers, this attitude applies to arable. It's not like that. It's all individuals. Within arable farming, within dairy farming, within mixed farming, you'll have people within those segments. So the message has to be generally to farming. And the segments are useful, as I say, for tailoring the message. There are differences by age, but they're not massive. They're not important enough to focus on an older age group or for example. And there's that need to recognise different types of people are farmers across all types of farming. So that message goes to all farming, but tailored to a certain type, and particularly where the type where the risks are greatest. So just looking now to what goes wrong. These messages have to be applied to something. So what is going wrong? And by way of a spoiler, it's basically a lack of underpinning knowledge, particularly technical knowledge, and a failure to systematically manage risk. That's where things are going wrong. Workplace transport, 38 deaths in the past 5 years. It's 50-50 split between getting run over and an overturn. And shockingly, 60% run over by their own vehicle. And we talked, it was mentioned, handbrakes, the use of handbrakes. The perception, if I'm not working on steep ground, I don't need to use them. It's wrong. Whatever ground, the act of putting your handbrake on, maintaining your handbrake, putting the handbrake on can make a massive difference. And it takes seconds. The attitude that it's not important is wrong. And also, 56 of those killed in a tractor overturns were not wearing a seatbelt. Again, when we were saying no one wears seatbelts, well, obviously some people are wearing seatbelts. Unfortunately, they also show that wearing a seatbelt isn't the answer to protecting you from a fatal incident. However, it gives you a better chance. People do wear seatbelts. But if you're in an overturned situation and you're not wearing a seatbelt, then the chances of that outcome being fatal or severe injury are much higher. So workplace transport, biggest single cause of workplace deaths in agriculture, and as it says there, more than half of these can be prevented following a safe stop and wearing a seatbelt. And a safe stop is just that. Engaging the handbrake, as long as that handbrake is working and maintained, put the machine out of gear, switching the engine off, removing the key. Half of those fatal accidents wouldn't have happened if that simple message has got across and people follow it. And there's all sorts of excuses for not following it, but you've got to question whether those excuses are real excuses or justified. Work at height, falls from height, 27 deaths in the past 5 years, 15 through fragile materials. People going up on the roof, walking the purlins. 3 falls from ladders, 2 falls from silage clamps, 7 others on machinery and high. And it's the working the purlins. The picture on the bottom right it's there because it reflects an incident that I investigated. I couldn't find the pictures that I'd taken. It was a fatal injury, a farmer who was alone. He operated the farm by himself as well, went through the roof, and unfortunately was killed on landing. I couldn't find the photographs, but it was indicative of the problem in that it didn't take me long at all to find another photograph from another investigation of almost exactly the same circumstances, where he had decided on a day, unbeknown to anybody else, he didn't stay on the farm anymore. It was a family farm. His son still stayed there, but his son wasn't active in farming. It was just the father. And he didn't tell anyone what he was doing that day. They don't know whether he just decided to do that day or something was planned for the week. He went up on top of the roof, and the roof was asbestos cement, so it was fragile. It had roof lights in it as well. But 2 years before, just to improve the longevity of it, he'd had it spray painted, and they painted over everything, including the windows. But he went on, using a ladder just like that, not tied, not secured in any way, and it didn't go above the joists there anyway as well, so that made it even harder getting off. There was no crawling boards, there was nothing. It was in a shed that it was thought that because there were bales inside, he wanted to make sure it was watertight so they didn't affect the bales, but the bales were there. So he went up, and whilst walking across what's assumed to be the line of the purlins, assuming to be on a safe area, whether he stumbled or didn't see it, he went through the skyline. And during the investigation, I spoke with the son, trying to establish what the guy's movements were. And what was very notable about the son is he had a very distinct limp. And what came out in the interview was, as a teenager, under the instructions of his father, he had fallen through a skylight on that very same roof and had life-changing injuries from that. So this is the kind of, it was a real eye-opener for me in what we are challenged with here. We've got risks that are so well known, we've got precautions that are so well known. The irony with those bales, one of the precautions we recommend if you're doing work on fragile roofs is to put bales underneath them, right up to roof. So you prevent stepping on the material by having crawling boards in place secured. But if you do go over and you do go through the roof, you're not going to hit the ground, you're going to have bales. There were bales in there. He had a vehicle to move them. So the precautions there, they just weren't taken. It was just indicative of what we're trying to tackle. Falls from height. And again, it comes back to this lack of planning, a lack of training, technical training on work at height, a lack of equipment so you can do it safely, and no systems of work. And that will be a theme that comes up in other things as well, and particularly in the industry I look at too. Particularly when it comes to chainsaw operations. This is what's killing people, and there's no other activity that HSE regulates which has a higher risk than felling trees. Yet we still see a lack of planning, a lack of appropriate training, misunderstanding between training and competence, a lack of equipment, and no safe system of work. Struck by falling objects, 18 fatal incidents in the last 5 years. This is where the felling work comes in on farms. as well. So struck by trees, branches, it's not the chainsaw itself, it's what's being felled, it's what's being put into free fall in potentially uncontrolled manners. 5 people killed by bales, 6 by machinery. And again, if you're looking at what's going wrong, lack of planning, lack of training, lack of equipment, no safe system of work. Entanglement with moving machinery. One of the successes really was in terms of improving standards, along with tractor cabs, safe cabs, was PTOs. And there was some insight into perception of risk, and it was identified there's a great understanding of the risk in PTOs. And I think that's reflected in work that was done over the years. So the understanding of the risk associated with PTOs, and you very rarely see completely bare PTOs. And the accidents from contact with a moving PTO have vastly got less. There was one last year, but it's almost like an exception. So the understanding of the risk is there. We'll see damaged PTOs, but rarely do we see completely unguarded PTOs. But they're still involved in fatal accidents. So entanglement moving machinery, 16 fatal, 5 self-propelled machines, 10 trailed machines. And this year we've had, as I said, we measure incidents from April to March. This is April, we've had 3 fatals already. Yesterday's was cattle. The one before that, which is a couple of weeks ago, I think, was in a stone separator, which is not dissimilar to the grave there. Pulled by a tractor, and again, someone getting entangled whilst working on it, maintenance work. Operator unlikely to be entangled in the machinery when you're in the working position. That's the safe position to be, but we still get people who go and put themselves in areas where the risk is massive. Operator at risk when having to carry out maintenance activities. Usually that's a blockage. And again, it's the same as when you're leaving a vehicle. It only takes a few steps that can potentially save a life. Applying a handbrake, controls to neutral, stop the engine, remove the key. The risk is gone. You're not having to then use these soft skills to manage a risk that you don't need to face. The risk is gone. It's making sure people understand that and forcing people, getting people to do it. And as I said before, straightforward solutions. They abound. They're tried and they're tested. They're even developing as well, and they're readily available. They're not hard to come across. Our website contains most of them, but the industry is also doing work to improve things. When it comes to the non-technical skills, they're integral. They are important to successfully controlling risks. They need to be developed in people early. It's not a standalone subject that needs to be applied. It's just that, standalone and applied to other activities. They need to be integral to all the learning. Those soft skills that can make a difference. About communicating, about leadership, about planning. And they should be applied consistently. So, just because time constraints are applying, just because you're not feeling great, you still need to apply them. Those skills of communicating. Messages about risk, messages about precautions, planning, those risk assessment processes. No matter what the conditions, if the risk is significant, that work has to be done. And they need to be challenged and tested as well. Challenge is one of the biggest things that's missing from forestry, I know particularly, and also from agriculture. Where people are doing something wrong, it's that challenge to them. And that comes to leadership as well. And it's not leadership above, it's leadership from your peers. That challenge to people who aren't wearing what they should be wearing, aren't doing things they should be doing. That can make a difference. As I said, it's integral to the success of controlling this. But, and there is a but, such skills should be developed and applied within a framework of well-designed, robust management systems. And that includes good technical skills. A lot's kind of been applied, referred to industries such as the oil industry and firefighters and pilots. The difference here is that these people are selected. They go through a selection process. And they're aptitude for those jobs and those roles is tested and assessed. They then go through training specific to their roles, and that training also involves the risks that they face and the controls that are needed and skills are needed to do it. They are then rigorously tested, and they're required to demonstrate that they understand this before they move on. And that is continuous. Their training is continuous. Their testing of these skills are continuous. It's based on past experience and programs of work and processes that are tried and tested and developed and ever changing. And that's reflected in their training as well. It's not so great for agriculture. Most people are born into it. Survival of the fittest. If they love and have a passion for it and they can stand the rigors of it, they'll continue to do it. That might not make the best person to manage the risks. It might not. But there's no selection in terms of those attitudes. The skills that they learn can be a bit hit and miss. The detailed technical training that is provided to pilots, to firemen, might not be there, is often not there. They might have the skills to do all these things, but the training might be missing to do them properly and consistently. And the management structures and the resourcing around it is very different. We do need non-technical skills, but the main goal of farming at the moment is to provide those detailed technical skills and those management systems that mean that the risks are reduced to the lowest reasonable practical levels. And we're talking about hierarchy of controls. We're talking about eliminating those risks. So people aren't having to use the soft skills to manage a situation that they don't need to face. They're working underneath an overhead power line, for instance, and using these soft skills to manage that risk when the overhead power line doesn't need to be there, or the work that they're doing underneath that overhead power line doesn't need to be done there. So we are looking really, and that's our role and the role of the industry, to improve those non-technical standards, to get people to understand what the risks they face and how they manage those risks effectively and do it consistently. So in terms of the hierarchy, that's what we're looking at the moment. Eliminating that risk, substituting the risk for something less, and putting in the hard controls that will do it. The non-technical skills are important. As I say, they're integral to all these areas, and it's not just the individual doing the work, it's the individuals who are planning the work, it's the individuals who are supervising the work. It is integral, but we have a big challenge in the industry, and that is to get people the skills necessary so they can do their work safely and without risk to themselves and others. And this is where the Scottish Farm Safety Partnership is mentioned, I think, because help is all around. A lot of work is being done on this, and it continues to be done. And the success of these bodies is potentially still there, and we will see it. So, any questions at all? I'm happy to answer. If not, thank you very much. Yes.
I just wanted to ask if you had any insights into demographics of the attitudinal segments.
Well, I think what came out there was no sort of set type of work or specific sector of the industry that fell into one or the other. I think it was, again, this isn't an area I've had a great deal of involvement with, but I think what came out of that is these segments, the people who had these attitudes that put them in the segment could be anywhere, could be doing any kind of work. So it's like general population, really. It wasn't a dictator of where these people will be working, so, or age, although there was sort of, as was identified, the risk takers tended to be.
Do you have a breakdown of male, female, age groups?
It's probably within the report. I don't know myself, but it would probably be within the report.
Just a quick thing. In the report, or as your general awareness, the bit about the people who are the 23%, is there any kind of correlation between that and was there any questions kind of give you a hint about their mental health status? Because they appear from the needing the arm around the shoulder to potentially be the ones that are most vulnerable.
Yes, and I mentioned with what's called the pragmatists and the accuracy of these labels. They have to label them. The accuracy, risk taker, pragmatist doesn't mean risk taker, doesn't mean pragmatic. They were identified as being the happiest, basically, and the most content within their work and their life. At the other end, the least happiest were that 23% of unclear. And I think it was reflected in, I remember when you visited a farm and you turned up and everything was neat and tidy and everything was in its place and everything, there wasn't a lot of bustle. The person you met, whose farm it was, generally was quite confident in what he's done, quite happy to speak to you and quite content with his lot and his success in his farm. You go to the farms that are, there's old machinery, it's scattered, it's untidy, it's dirty, it's unmaintained. And then you meet people who they're not so pleased to see you. Their responses is very negative. I think that kind of, and the study is bearing that out. They're the least happiest, really. So yes, there is correlations with mental health.
Hi, Ian. I'm a big fan of HSE, but unfortunately I cannot say that on behalf of my farmers that I represent, which is a shame. Your website, I think, is brilliant, and I'm not saying we don't need any more new information published, but the information that's on that website is absolutely first class, and I'm sure it can be refined and whatever changed as time goes on. The reality is, I bet you there's hardly any farmers. I've tried to persuade some of my farmers to actually engage in that sort of information, but there isn't a positive response to that. And what I was going to say is, I wonder if, and it's not a blame about HSE or anything like that, but I'll take SEPA as an example. SEPA used to put the fear of God into our farming community. Now, SEPA then, it was at a high level, CEO level, they took a different approach and they decided they wanted to be the farmer's friend, if you like, and work with farmers as opposed to go in and look for problems or go in after an accident and throw the book at them and charge them and fine them. So there's a different approach, there's a different attitude. It's taken years. We're still not where we should be yet, but there's a change in culture. And I wonder if it was possible for HSE not to necessarily copy that, but to look at a different approach to try and engage with these farmers on that sort of level, as opposed to coming in with a big stick. I'm making you sound like you're awful, I don't mean that, but it's usually when HSE get involved, because you're under-resourced like everybody else, you have to come in and investigate where there's a problem, and then there's fines and court cases and all that, and that's what farmers see, and you do put the fear into lots of people, and I wonder if there could be a change.
Well, I think a lot is perception. We haven't had kind of preventative programmed inspections of farms for quite a while, yet people still think that we're out there and we're doing all the things that you say. Yet we weren't on farms, yes, and we understand that as well. We are starting to go back because the role of regulation, I think, well, obviously I think it's very important as a prompt, but it's also recognised it's just one of the strands that is going to make improvements. And the biggest influencer is the industry itself and getting the industry to do it. Things have changed because of FIFA intervention, there's no doubting about that. But that's the reality, and that's applied when consistently, the idea, when there's necessity to do it. Farmers don't see us that often, I think. It's usually now when it goes wrong, and it would be more so now, but specific, more targeted approaches. So a lot of it is about perception. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, there's a perception we're awful, we don't. But a lot of this guidance is coming because we are working with the industry. We're working with yourselves. We're working with the farm safety partnerships. We're working with other agencies who can influence. So we are working and doing this work along with our enforcement side of it. But I don't think our enforcement side is going to change. It's going to be more targeted. Yeah. Well, it's all up for discussions. Our chance. That's one of the ways that we did this. Right. This is how we want you to do it, and this is demonstrating ways of doing it. And simple things. Manual handling one was one of the best ones because people saw things that they could easily do. And in terms of the people who are reluctant or confused or unclear about what they need to do, it's brilliant. You know, but we did that, and we're still continuing to do that. So I know people think of us as just regulators, but there is more to what we do, and particularly within our unit, to try and influence and get the influencers to do that as well. So, yeah, I don't know how we're going to change perceptions like that, though. Very clearly.
Sorry, I've got one further question. What are your views on the NHS trust reporting system in Scotland? Like, do you see all the A&E reports involving the bull tossing the farmer over the hedge and missing digits?
No. Well, I think part of the statistics, this isn't one of my areas. In terms of statistics, they're not looking just at Riddle because of the underreporting. So there are other ways of collecting the information. If it's as specific as that, I'm unsure, because even Riddle we have problems in terms of the quality of the information that we can take from there. But I don't think it's going to necessarily, having more detail, more reports, going to be able to help us identify or make us think we're not targeting the right bits anyway. Most people most of the fatal injuries are transport, are falls. We know that. Having more detail might not help, won't necessarily make a lot of difference to us. So yeah, there are other ways than Riddle getting that information, but the detail isn't necessary.
Okay, we're running a little bit over, so we'll have to move on to the last slide.
Okay.
Slight technical issues.
Okay. Sounds like the microphone's working anyway.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
Okay, you go ahead and we'll leave it away in the background. Your stuff's okay, so.
Okay, good. I've got quite a few slides with quite a lot of information, but half the time. So it will be a whistle stop. But at least you'll have the slides and you can read those at your leisure and use them, please. I'm here really wearing two hats. I was asked to, in the very early stages of this project, I'm Vice Chair of IOSH. Any members of IOSH here, by the way? I know John is because he sits on the industry group committee with us. Yes, we represent the health and safety professionals, so that's consultants, those managing health and safety in businesses, a very wide range of activities, as I'll show in a minute. And I'm also on the board I represent IOSH on the board of the Farm Safety Partnerships for England, and I also chair the Transport Machinery Safety Working Group, I think we call it. So that's my sort of pedigree, and other than that, about 33 years in HSE as an inspector, so I've been where Ian is now, and ended up my last 7 years working in the sector, working nationally on agricultural safety. So this is really my objectives, what I was asked to do, what I thought I ought to do, being on the last slot really to pick up on the key things really that's been said today and weave it in. So some of my slides are fairly open. I could talk for half an hour on some of the individual slides, so we can contract it as well. I needed to speak just really what IOSH is, for those who don't know, and our activities in the Farm Safety Partnership. Again, putting NTS in the context of what we've been talking about. Others have done that for us very well already. And a couple of examples from my own perspective some of which I've been involved with myself. Particularly then to look at what currently exists in terms of training, where non-technical skills are already covered. How do we get this information out? A couple of thoughts there, and applying the research in the industry, and IOSH has to think internationally as well. We've got 47,000 members worldwide. Unfortunately, they're not all in agriculture. In the Rural Industries Group, we've got 400. But there we are. So that's why we're here. This is a sequence of photographs taken off the television. It's a chap got his leg caught in the home rollers of a potato harvester. It was filmed as it happened by one of the 999 emergency programs. Purely coincidence, they went out to that incident. The guy was still trapped there, typically for an hour and a half. The fire brigade can't work out how to get people out. So you can see the two rollers in the top right. His leg went through that. You can see it just bottom left. Not in very good condition. It was New York. And the whole rescue process, as you can see. That's why we're here. And this is the sort of accident we're talking about. It's the same old, same old. It happens every year. The same thing, the same type of machinery. I guess the stone set break was similar. So it's because people are willing to work on these machines while they're under power, to clean them. It's foreseeable misuse in legislative terms. Something should be done in terms of being able to clean these safely. I won't go through this in detail, but this is really a bit about IOSH. I just said we've got a lot of members worldwide. It is the only chartered body. It's got a royal charter, and they do provide support. And I'm pleased to say, given quite a lot of support to the Farm Safety Partnership over the last few years in terms of running. So you understand what that's about. It was the first one that was set up, and HSE's chair really challenged the industry. In fact, I think she said that she wouldn't let her children go and work in this industry. That was quite an eye-opener because it was too dangerous. So quite a few organisations got together, including IOSH, and said I'm on the board along with others. The NFU Vice President chairs it, Tom over there is the Secretary, one of them. We're bedding in, but we reached a point where we needed to revitalise it. We've recently had a meeting with a new chairman, and it's a breath of fresh air, and we're moving forward. It looks very good, and these are our themes for the coming year. Children, walking at height, I've just seen that, working at height, transport machinery and cattle handling. Over the past few years, all the activities of previous working group, a lot's been done on livestock, slurry gas. We held a workshop on cattle handling and footpaths with people from the industry. About 70 or 80 people have attended each of those. The AIC, which represents distributors of seeds and fertilisers and so on, they produced guidance as well, which has gone out to all their businesses on for deliveries to farms. And again, we organised an event up at Aston Bryan, down at Aston Bryan from here, near York, on transport and safe deliveries. So it's farm transport and on-road transport. And again, that was well attended. And that's about putting out a good practice in a practical way. And again, a lot of the things we're talking about we're presenting. So there's an example of the three events I've been involved in. The first one was on machinery, and these were about looking for priorities for the safety partnership. The cattle handling one and the transport and deliveries I just mentioned. Oh, we've won awards, by the way, I have to mention. An odd one is rail crossings, and working with Network Rail and particularly Office of Rail Regulation. We saw there was an issue there where, and again this is where non-technical skills are very important, it's that perception of risk, tractors, drivers being willing to cross a nice quiet, what they think is a quiet rural gated crossing without lights. And you look at some of the incidents that happened, and certainly Network Rail are very concerned that could cause a major incident. So we've been running these days. We've got a whole, that was an accident near York, as the consequences, half a tractor. But we've got a piece of track set up in the middle of Cannock Chase, in the middle of the forest there, basically to play trains, but to play level crossings anyway, and that's used throughout the year. You can create all sorts of scenarios, one of which was deliveries. There's power cables alongside there, so we cover power lines as well at the same time. Just to show that they work, virtually identical. That picture there was taken on the fens of Cambridge about 2 weeks after a chap who'd come along to one of these days. And he was driving across the fens, saw that lorry reverse and tip. And he stood there, what am I going to do? He took a photograph, but he drove straight up there and said to the guy, don't get out. And so you could argue that saved a life, actually, attending one of these events. It's unbelievable, so soon. IOSH courses cover NTS issues. You can see there the range, that's the range of subjects, from not least leading safety and managing safely. I've got some more information coming up on those, and they're grouped by skill level and level to share. The Working Safely one, just to highlight that in particular, it's a one-day course. The sales pitch, which I think we would all accept, it is about improving your whole performance and motivating staff to do things other than just work safely. So that's important, it goes together. They're the selling points. And it does emphasise that it brings more to the business than just improving health and safety. And no jargon, no legalese. It's about getting people up there and going. And it covers occupational health as well as safety, and helps define hazard and risk and gets people moving in a practical way. That's the important thing to improve performance. But something new, light bulb moments, safety and health for business. So this is a level 3 qualification targeted at obviously management there, and it's quite an interesting course. It's new, it's regulated, launched back end of last year. It's international, gone through all sort of the processes, but the issue is that going to find its way into farming? I don't know. You're going to have a concerted effort, and this is why. I was discussing on our table that Europe was funding training back a few years ago, 2012, for about 2 or 3 years, and we were able to help farmers to get on courses they wouldn't normally attend. It was about improving management skills. Safety was accepted, not technical skills, operating the chainsaws. It was really about management and improving the business. Forgive me for the abbreviation there. The TTAW is the Training Association West, which is a training association, farmers training group that covers quite a lot of Cambridgeshire and Bedfordshire, which is my part of the world, and I used to manage the Bedfordshire group. And UK Renewal Skills, which is an agglomeration of quite a few independent trainers. They've got their own accredited courses now. And I asked them, what are your training courses, what courses do you provide that cover the non-technical skills? And I hope that Jo is listening in, because she couldn't make it up here today. But it's very helpful to hear this, because the structure of this course is about developing leadership, planning, managing time, which also helps in terms of carrying out the operation safely, negotiating influencing outcomes, that's the conflict resolution as well, we've picked up on that, and budgets and costs. Solving problems, building a team, all these things we'd expect. And part of that was producing a 1,000-word assessment, an assignment, a written report related to your place of work. You can go on beyond that and get a certificate. The thing was, this was a 6-day program, each of those elements being a day, not consecutively and spread out. And it was the fee, including registration, was under £500. Now, farmers were going on to that because it was funded. It's a full cost is £1,000. They haven't run that course since 2014. There's no demand. It's such a shame, because that's what we should be pushing. So, will the IOSH course work? Unit 1, Safe and Health Management, looking at the workplace hazards, very, very similar to what I've just described. Certainly about good practice, and again, producing an assessment based on the business experience of the individual. Second unit, influencing the culture, critical. Ways of helping change, getting the message over, absolutely critical. Communications, tackling behaviour, how you deal with the wrong people who aren't following good practice. With that benefit of boosting business performance as well, with an assessment also. And then lastly, the strategic sort of approach to it. Again, looking at the organisation. See you, John.
Oh, yeah,
See you again soon. Take care.
Wishes.
Have a good flight via Amsterdam, I understand, to get back to Ireland. So it's about accountability and compliance and so on. So yeah, that course is up and running, and if you think anybody would benefit from that, please approach Ian. I don't get a handout for a trader for that or anything, I'm afraid. But in terms of IOSH and the competence of trainers, as I said, 179,000 courses. They've got 2,000 providers over the world. 15,000 courses in 74 countries, so it's a big organisation, and they have to be reliable, so they're accredited, as it says at the bottom there, and haven't had experience in teaching and training before they even get onto these courses. You can also develop your own courses and get them accredited. I've called that DIY, and that's the process. So, coming back now to some of the examples of non-technical skills. I'm okay for a couple of minutes. I know we're nearing the end. But, yeah, this is the way I put it together, and the comment that made by a colleague, ex-colleague in NTSAg, we've just been killing people in the same old ways. First time safety regs, 1878. Looking at it was the thrashers and bailiffs regulations they called it then. It was enforced by policemen, bobbies on bikes. There wasn't a safety inspector. But then we've got the modern award-winning designs. HSE gave Case an award for that because it was self-clearing blockages, so you didn't have to stick your hand in places where it was going to get chopped off. So that was quite clever. But accidents still happen with these machines. A couple of examples. Overhead power lines we've talked about. Why, when they run across the corner, that's the place where boxes are going to be stored, machinery is going to be stored, for whatever reason. And that was the consequences of fatality there, where they actually hid the pole. You can just see it the other side of the hedge, put conifers around it. Why? And a Polish worker, reversely, was told to tip on the headland, and unfortunately he contacted the 11 kV cables and was electrocuted, and his wife was working in the field. Pretty awful. Near Wisbech in Cambridge. There's another road crossing incident, and coming back to the situational awareness and following practice, you rely on exactly what it is. You stop, look and listen. It says it all in one sign. But it's quite difficult when you're in a tractor making a lot of noise, and you're quite a few metres away from the track and the sight lines are poor, so it's a difficult process. You might need to think about banksmen and so on. The key thing with all of this, and Ian said as well, it is vital, obviously, non-technical skills, all of the individual parts of it. It's not just one element, but it's putting it in the context of safety and not just relying on the individual, putting PPE on people or whatever. It's about eliminating the risk in the first place. When we talk about power lines, while they're still there, they should be buried. And then you need to use other means as well to be aware, but I agree, it's the last line of defence often. I just found this on the website when I was going through it. I'll just let you digest that. And that's another thing we need to think about. When we're being critical of whether it's somebody on television doing something silly, whatever, it's easy sometimes to say, I quite like that, going for goggles, but you could throw the whole gamut of non-technical skills at that one picture. Yes, it could have other devices to make it safe, not least, but people do some strange things. Just coming to safe stop now. We've talked about it a few times, and it's something that we've been pushing hard in the Safety Partnership. HSE give these away, which I would like to pass around. So please pass and take them on if you haven't seen it. We'd love any comments on that. Basically, it's a toolbox talk that evolved from something that the dealers gave out. But just as an example, this photograph here, again, was The chap driving that tractor was impaled by a bale spike, which, as you know, is probably about this long. It actually went right through his body, and he survived. He was, again, the regular hour and a half to disconnect it all, and he went to hospital with this thing sticking out of him. They couldn't cut it. When they got it out of him in the hospital, he appeared on television brandishing this spike, and he was the hero because all he wanted to do was get back and put it on the front of his, put it back on the machine. He didn't stand up and say, "I was really stupid, I didn't put the handbrake on." You know, by millimetres it moved vital organs, blood vessels and so on out of the way. So it is that, just take that few seconds and for them to say, "I don't need it, you know, it's flat ground or whatever." And the only reason he survived, there was a chap lived next door who he couldn't get a mobile signal other than at the tree at the bottom of his garden, and he heard the guy shouting when he went to make a phone call. But then paper made a hero of it. He survived. Put the handbrake on, neutral, stop the engine, take the key. And that's the setup there, of course. And did anybody look at any of the coverage of Farm Safety Week last year in July? Do you remember the first day? It was Al Murray, known as the pub landlord, who launched the week. The chap on the right there, he was a teenager when he did exactly what the guy did on the left, and Al Murray was visiting the farm and cycling back to the house. They having a picnic in the field, and he heard him shouting. He advised him how to switch the tractor off in no uncertain terms, but that really stuck with Al Murray, and they've been friends lifelong, and it was good to get him involved. The chap on the right just mentioned that incident to me at a training event. I thought we've got to get him involved, and he came along. So, you know, that's the sort of thing we need to do, put the messages over. There's a toolbox tool. On the back of it, you'll see that the accident figures that were quoted probably needs just changing a bit now, but it's the same proportion really. But it's not about putting them in the tractor. It's putting them on your mobile phone, the laptop, and so on. It's conveying the message in as many different ways as you can. So the little square boxes, they're all waterproof decals, so you can stick them on, you know, wherever you want. But I'd quite like to see that approach used for other issues. Yellow wellies, some of you will have heard of, and in fact I was explaining what that is earlier. Foundation set up by the NFU Mutual. They've got money to put into promoting safety. That's why they're going around colleges giving presentations and running something like HSE's Safety and Health Awareness Day, SHADS, producing films and doing a real lot of good work. I don't know how long funding will continue, Tom, do you know? But we need it to carry on, don't we? They're doing a superb job. And they pull Farm Safety Week, Stephanie Barkley pulls the Farm Safety Week together for all of the 5 nations, so it's UK plus the Republic. We all on message and give the same information at the same time. I think somebody mentioned this, the seatbelt campaign. This one was where a young lad was killed, and they started trending on Twitter and Facebook, I think, "Buckle up for Iceman." And wearing a seatbelt. The one person that died in that crash there was the tractor driver because he was thrown out the door. And wear your seatbelts. Nearly at the end, mustn't forget health issues, and we're pushing through IOSH cancer-causing agents. So last year we were certainly looking at some skin cancer. Stress and fatigue, got to be high on the list. And there we are. This is a very old poster back in my sort of days as an inspector, which I think is so good. It's a great message. And why are people, you know, driving themselves into the ground? It's because they're not following that basic advice. That's what I would say. And so thank you. I end my lesson there, and sorry it was so rushed. Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to finish up by very quickly saying thank you so much to all of you for coming along. The discussion groups in particular were amazing for those of us who work regularly with undergraduate students who perhaps don't like to talk as much. It's been really good to have you guys all talking to each other so much. What I'd like to say in kind of conclusion to all of this really is that I think that by working together with all our different
approaches, non-technical skills, technical competence, regulatory guidelines, we can really make a difference to farm fatalities and injuries. And I think it's really important to take something from all of those approaches and really start working together and coordinating. It's something that we often find is important in terms of research institutions, finding out that other people are doing little bits of things and then trying to coordinate everyone. And I hope that this has been useful from a networking perspective for you guys as well, just talking to one another. And the final thing I want to say, because we like giving and bestowing things upon people, is that we have lots of extra packs for the workshop, so if anyone would like some extra ones to take away with you, to share with colleagues, let us know and we'll furnish you with some. We also were given a plethora of prints of our various leaflets, so additionally we have plenty of those if you would like to take those away with you. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay after to ask a few additional questions or discuss anything, but otherwise I wish you safe journeys home. Thank you very much for taking part, and you all know my email to get in contact with me afterwards anyway. So, and I think everyone deserves a round of applause.